So let's start by building the model. And this is the approach I suggest that you sort of learn by heart and that you use in all situations where you're explaining the model to somebody or you're debriefing a report. So let's start. The first thing is we draw the axis. Have you ever noticed that some people are more results and task focused and some people are more people and relationship focused? And most people will say, yes, I recognize that, that makes sense to me. Also, would you accept this as a continuum? And people can be different places along this continuum. In fact, they can move up and down this continuum themselves, depending on circumstances. Have you ever noticed that some people like to talk and like to tell? They're outgoing, and some people like to be more reserved, like to ask questions and listen. And most people will say, yeah, I understand that, that's clear, I know lots of people like that. And again, you say, and would you accept this as a continuum? And that people can move up and down this continuum. And again, most people will say, yeah, that makes sense to me. And now you've built your XY axis, you've built your 4 quadrants. And when you've done this, name these quadrants. So people who are results and task focused and who are outgoing, tell, talk, we tend to call that style dominance. And people who are outgoing, tell, talk and who are people relationship focused, we tend to name that as influence. And then the third quadrant, people who are people relationship focused but who are reserved, who are sort of ask listen kinds of people, we tend to call that steadiness. And people who are reserved, ask listen but who are task and results focused, we tend to call that compliance. So now we have our 4 quadrants: dominance, influence, steadiness and compliance. And the next step in the process is I typically tend to colour them. And so that people get a sense of this red, yellow, green and blue. This helps to make the graphic more graphic and to make it clearer to people. Let me explain to you what this dominance, influence, steadiness and compliance means, how we talk about it. And we use the P and C words. So we start and we say dominance. The P and C word here is problems and challenges. And by problems and challenges, we say we're talking about how they deal with problems and challenges. And this is your opportunity to bring the word how in. What we're measuring here is how one does something. So how does somebody deal with problems and challenges? And we can say that people deal with them in a direct way or in a more reflective way. We then talk about I, influence, and we say what's the P and C here? It's people and contacts. And again we use the word how. It's how do people manage their relationships? How do they interact with people? How do they influence people and contacts? And again we say that there are 2 aspects to this. There are people who are outgoing and the people who are reserved. The third one we look at is steadiness. And the P and C here, of course, is pace and consistency. How do people deal with pace and consistency? And we have the opportunity again here to say that there are 2 ways. Some people are very steady regarding how they deal with pace and consistency, steady Eddie if you wish, and some people are very dynamic. And then the last one we look at is compliance. And we say to people, compliance is about procedures and constraints. How do we manage, how do we deal with procedures and constraints that are, if you wish, outside of us? And again, we have the opportunity to say there are 2 approaches, a precise approach and a pioneering approach. So now we've painted the first picture of how, and we have those 4 areas that we're measuring. How do we deal with problems and challenges, which we call dominance? How do we deal with people and contacts, which we call influence? How do we deal with pace and consistency, which we call steadiness? And how do we deal with procedures and constraints, which we call compliance? And that's our DISC model, D-I-S-C. None of these are better than the others. There's no good or bad, right or wrong. There just is. And what we're interested in is how does one work? What combination of these allows somebody to have that unique style that they have? Now, the next step in the process is we look at the wants, emotions and fears. All of these styles have wants, emotions and fears. So people, for example, they're very outgoing, tell talk, and they are results and task focused. What they want is results. The emotion is anger, or we often say short fuse. And the fear is the fear of being taken advantage of. The wants, emotions and fears of the I, well, the want is recognition. They want to be recognized. The emotion is optimism. And the fear is the fear of rejection or ridicule. The wants, emotions and fears of the S, of the steady side, the person who's people, relationship focused but is reserved, is an ass-listen type of person. What they want is they want relationship and respect. Their emotion is non-emotional, or we call it poker face. And the fear is a loss of stability. In case of the C, the compliance, the person who is reserved, asks, listen, but is results task focused, the want is to be right. The emotion is fear. And the fear is criticism. So let's look at those again. The results task focused person who's outgoing, tell talk, this dominant style. What they're looking for is results. They have a short fuse and they're afraid to be taken advantage of. The influencer, the I, the person who is all about people and relationships but is outgoing, tell talk. What they're looking for is recognition. What their emotion is optimism, sometimes unbridled, and their fear is rejection or ridicule. The S, the steady person, the steadiness, what they want is relationship and respect. The emotion is non-emotional, they keep it all under the surface. We call it poker face. And the fear is a loss of stability. And for the C, the person who's reserved, asks, listen, but his results and task focus, what they want is to be right. The emotion is fear, and the fear is criticism, that they would get something wrong, that they'll make a mistake, that they won't be right. So this is the core of the model. The next important thing is, of course, that none of us are any one style. We are a blend of the style. So for example, here is my graph. So when we look at this graph, my DISC graph, you can see here clearly that what we have here is we have somebody who is very direct, outgoing, tell talk, reinforced by the I, which is also outgoing, tell talk. And the D is very results focused and the I is very people relationship focused. So you have a very outgoing, tell talk person who is bottom line, results task focused, but wants to interact with people. But then you see the S is way down there. You say, okay, the S, in terms of pace and consistency, this person is not steady. They're the opposite. They're this dynamic S. There's a real sense of urgency and moving and doing things, and lots of balls in the air, lots of change. And you see the C, likewise, you see the C is a pioneering C. It's not a precise C, it's a pioneering C. They bend and break the rules. How the D, I, S and C interact with each other, and it's this blend that creates the individual. Now going back up to our graph here for a moment, our XY axis, you then have the opportunity to actually build the wheel on top of this as follows. The further out you go, the more intense the particular style is. So for example, in here at the core, the D is not very intense. Indeed, nor would the I, the S or the C be. But off out here, the D is very intense, very, very strong, very dominant. And you can do the same for the I and the S and the C. That this is a continuum. People can move up, down this continuum, but they have a preferred style, they have a preferred position for their D, their I, their S and their C. These D, I, S and C can blend into each other. So how, for example, there can be a piece of D and I merged together, and that gives us a particular blend of D and I. Or there can be a an I and an S blended together, and that gives us another particular blend. You can go from 4 styles, D, I, S and C, to 8 types, D blended with I blended with S blended with C and C blended with D. You get these 8 types. You can end up with 60 positions on the wheel and 384 reports drawing from thousands of statements. And this is very important to begin to get a sense of the uniqueness and the variety of all the potential combinations that you can have and how these make up an individual's behavioural profile. The last thing I want to look at here is very quickly is the continuum. And this is typically the last thing that I share with people. So if you look at my graph just there, and now we will look at how I explain this in the continuum to somebody. I draw out the graph the exact same way with my pencil, and I explain to people as follows. Here we have our D, I, S and C. And I talk about the P's and C's again. So for each one I write out problems and challenges, people and contacts, pace and consistency, procedures and constraints. And I also explain that these are continuums. Once I've done that, I name them, just as we did up above. Remember, we already said direct, reflective, outgoing, reserved, steady, dynamic, and precise and pioneering. So I just do it again down here. And I colour code them the same as I did with the graph. And then I just draw my graph that you can see there. I just draw it on this. So now people get a very, very clear picture of the blending, if you wish. I think it's an even clearer way of describing the blending. We talk about the discontinuum. And it seems that when I explain this to people this way, they understand it in a better way. So I say, for example, that this is my position on the D, but I can move up and down. I can move up and down quite easily within a certain range. We call it flexing. But that to move further away from that particular position starts to cause me more stress. And if I cross the line and I move from a direct way of dealing with problems and challenges to a reflective way, I would find that very stressful. Explain how the same can be said for my way of dealing with people and contacts, pace, consistency, procedure, constraints.